Welcome to our SOHO Insider Oncology Brown Bag series. It's a great honor and privilege today to have Dr. Gwen Nichols, who's the Chief Medical Officer and a physician scientist who's really leading Blood Cancer United's scientific research portfolio in advocating for patients. And we're going to pick her brain today about how we facilitate getting research studies done, particularly in this current era where funding for research, particularly by the NCI and NIH, has been a little bit more challenging, and we relied on organizations like Blood Cancer United to step up and fill that gap. So, Dr. Nichols, welcome, and I'm happy for you to share some of your insights and things that you're excited about.
Thank you very much for having me today. I'm really interested in trying to help us figure out better ways to get clinical research done closer to home. Over my lifetime, we've made dramatic improvements in the 5-year survival rates in the major blood cancers. And over the last 25 years during my career, we've made even greater advances where myeloma, leukemia, in particular, were death sentences. We now have 60 to 70% survival rates, and even better in Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. This Blood Cancer United takes incredible pride in because we played a role over the last 70 years in supporting both biomedical and clinical research. But we have a real risk of those advances being stalled. And the reason why is that cancer clinical trials are the way that new discoveries move forward. And I have to tell you, with the advent of new immunotherapies and targeted therapies, the need for clinical trials because of the number of new agents and the potential for us to be able to stop using as much chemo and move to less toxic therapies will only happen if we can get more patients on clinical trials. And right now, only 7% of cancer patients in the US, might even be less, participate in clinical trials. And that is even more dramatic within Black and Hispanic populations and rural people who live in rural areas. More than 70% of US counties do not have a single active cancer clinical trial. That's data from 2022, but I don't think over the last 5 years that has changed. We're still not getting the trials to the patients. This is a really great statistic, and I bring it up because when given the opportunity, more than 50% of patients agree to enroll in a trial when it's offered to them, especially when it's offered to them by the oncologist that they trust. The problem is not the patient. The problem is the trial is hard for the patient to get to and hard for the patient to have access to. Now, why is this? Well, FDA requirements for trial sites are costly, and they're costly in terms of time and they're costly in terms of dollars. And so if you and your practice are thinking to expand and have more clinical trials, there's a lot that you need to build if you are not at a large academic medical center. Number one, you have to have a qualified PI, and that means a lot of paperwork, a CV, NCI's 1572 form, licenses, and licenses for any of your partners that are going to be sub-investigators. You need access to an IRB. You need adequate facilities and personnel, including not only the space, but equipment, laboratories that have certifications. You need research personnel, and you need them to be trained on protocol requirements, safety, good clinical practice, data collection, human subject protections, and you need to have records for all of that training. And then record keeping of source documents, regulatory documents, And consent documentation also needs to be well taken care of because there is inspection readiness and you must be prepared to potentially be inspected. And you need to have a way to control investigational product and account for it. And you need budget and accounting capabilities so that you can ask for reimbursement from the pharmaceutical company sponsoring the trial. Staff time also is really an important thing to think about. Clinical trial discussions are much more than a regular visit, right? And they take a they to do it right, you need to take enough time to answer a lot of questions. And because the consents and the protocols are complex, patients are often in need of a lot of discussion and and their families have a lot of questions. And many of the research activities, and this is really important and something that we're looking to try and solve. Many clinical research activities have no associated CPT code and no RVUs. So you won't get reimbursed for reviewing the protocol, for going to investigator meetings, for any of your regulatory documentation, for adverse event reporting, for any correspondence with the IRB and the paperwork that goes with it, recruitment activities, staff training. Now, pharmaceutical sponsors will cover some of these costs, but it's often not enough to make up for the fact that you will be seeing fewer patients in a busy practice. And so you need your administration to be behind you. And one of the things that Blood Cancer United is working on is trying to help come up with ways that this can be properly reimbursed so that it is not always a tug of war in a practice setting as opposed to an academic setting. Now, not only is Blood Cancer United interested in this, there's a lot of interest from pharma companies because they also realize that if we only do clinical trials at academic medical centers, there are two great risks. One is we just don't have enough slots to be able to, to see the number of patients to keep up with the pace of discovery. And the second is that patients who have the wherewithal, the means to get to academic centers are often not the average patient. And if we're treating 45-year-old males with cancer, we're missing what happens when the average 65 or 70-year-old cancer patient gets treated. It needs to happen in a much more realistic setting. Large pharma companies are providing various kinds of assistance, both infrastructure, staff support, a lot of training. They are looking to do a lot of this remotely, remote monitoring. There are a lot of great ideas, but there's still a lot of startup energy and cost, and that needs to be reimbursed. And they are starting to understand that. We also need to simplify what's needed to qualify as a research site, especially if it is a shared resource that you are treating patients along with a PI at an academic center. Making it easier for this to happen at smaller practices will make a huge difference. Big oncology networks are getting this and are offering more options with infrastructure because they share costs. So if you are part of a larger oncology network, the nursing, the data management, the pharmacy, the referrals, shared care models can happen more easily. And that is, there are already a lot of programs starting to utilize some of the larger oncology networks to build more oncology clinical trials in the community. But if you're in a smaller practice, you need to have relationships with larger cancer centers in order to do this. I think that is until the complexity goes down, until we understand how to make the infrastructure needed more simple. And frankly, clinical trials can be more efficient in an academic setting, especially when you're talking about very small subsets of diseases, limited, where you in your practice might see, 5% of patients with a given disease. An academic who is focusing just on that disease, a generalist versus a specialist, it makes a huge difference in terms of the amount you have to put in to prepare to see these patients and then only see one every 2 weeks. That's not efficient. This can be a big change, though, for patients because, frankly, patients trust their primary oncologists and, many times are not eager to be referred out. They also are not eager to undergo the travel, the cost, a new system, and it works against the primary oncologist because, frankly, you're not compensated for referring a patient out. So we need to come up with more hybrid models, especially in rarer diseases where referrals and shared care can be coordinated, where in the community, laboratories, scans, follow-up examinations can be done. But currently those kind of hybrid models are few and far between. We need to create those. There's also a cost to the patient. And so while a sponsor pays for the investigational costs and insurance is required to cover clinical trial participation, the patient still has to bear considerable expense to participate in a clinical trial, including deductibles and co-payments, travel and lodging if they need to leave, and that includes their caregiver. Many clinical trials require a caregiver. Parking, meals, childcare, loss of income, time off from work, and all of this, is very individualized. That being said, we have a lot of resources to help patients with those costs. And so we hope that that will be less of a burden for your patients once you have found the right way to help them and to help your practice develop an ability to participate in clinical trials. So what can we do to help? Well, a couple of things that we're doing, as I mentioned before, we're trying to make the process simpler. We're working with pharma to explore hybrid care options. We're lobbying the FDA to allow primary oncologists to perform follow-up for their patients, even if the treatment itself is complex and happens at an academic center. A CBC done in your lab is the same machine as is being done at the big cancer center. It just really does not need to be done there. It costs less, and it's better for the patient not to be traveling back and forth and back and forth. It will make it more possible for your patients to participate. We also need to be sure that you can bill for follow-up visits, standard follow-up, lab work evaluations, adverse event assessments. We can't guarantee that we'll get the RVUs right, but we've got to have some CPT codes. And we need to make the paperwork for becoming a sub-investigator less onerous. I also want to tell you that we have a free resource that I think every practice should make themselves aware of and avail themselves to. We have a group of 12 advanced practice nurses who are specialists in blood cancer, both pediatric and adult. We have a free comprehensive patient navigation service. These nurse navigators do a nursing, psychosocial, and educational assessment, and they can provide patients with individualized, patient-friendly lists of appropriate clinical trials that they are eligible for to discuss with the care team. This is not telling them to which trial to go on. We are not giving medical advice. We're giving them a list that fits their needs. They say, I can travel, but has to be under 50 miles. Or, how many times do I need to go back and forth? Or I have these labs Am I still eligible? Also, calling the site. Do you have a space open for this patient? What's the schedule for visiting? Do you have resources for patients? So, our nurses make oftentimes 30 or more calls to actually get a patient enrolled once you and your patient decide this is the trial I think is right for my patient. And we provide follow up throughout the process. And often that means for subsequent clinical trials. But all of this is free. And if you want to find a list of trials for a patient, you are also, as a practitioner or anyone in your office, welcome to call our Clinical Trial Support Center. We all know clinicaltrials.gov is incredibly difficult to navigate. We have a proprietary system on top of clinicaltrials.gov, and we talk to sites all the time. So we really can help patients find a list of potential trials for you to go over with your patient. This is the information about how to reach the Clinical Trial Support Center. It's a 1-800 number, 9 a to 9 p, Monday through Friday, Eastern Time. Or there's an online version, and you can complete an online referral form, which may be easier for your office staff. And finally, we offer a lot of patient financial assistance. And so, again, going to this 800 number, we have copay assistance for urgent needs that are non-medical, travel assistance for patients for CAR T cell, and a variety of other resources that are really valuable for your patients, especially those who are anticipating having to travel and having to be away from home. And I should make special note, we have a medical debt case management program where we can help patients navigate their debt and their hospital bills to help them with their finances. And to date, we have helped resolve more than $9 million worth of medical debt for blood cancer patients. So please take advantage of all of this. And again, this is the 800 number to reach our Information Resource Center. These are specialists, our social workers and nurses. We have Spanish speaking folks always available, and a language line if you have patients that are not English or Spanish speakers. And with that, I'll finish my talk, and please feel free to contact us.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols. I really appreciate you going through this. And obviously, these are topics that I find really important. I have a few questions for you. So,
Yeah.
have you seen community oncology programs that have successfully increased clinical trial enrollment, and what can others learn from them?
Well, I have, and we try and learn from them as well. One of the biggest areas that I've seen being successful is to get the pharma support to build the infrastructure and then utilize shared remote resources because it's awfully hard until you're up and really running with a lot of clinical trials to be able to afford a data entry person, a nurse on every single trial. And so having having those type of resources has been incredibly useful. And I think also one other thing and we've started some research on this, using your training and talking to patients about clinical trials at every point in their journey with you, even if it isn't the right time for a clinical trial, makes the discussion easier when the time is right to have a clinical trial. And I know I didn't always do that when I was in practice, but I really urge people to think about just, adding that to your general introductory patter, because patients are interested. As the stat showed, over 50% of them say yes to a clinical trial when it's offered to them. So people are thinking about it, and knowing that you're open to talking about it will mean a lot to your patients.
And how do we, or how does Blood Cancer United specifically facilitate partnering with those academic centers you talked about? Is there a way to sort of leverage the infrastructure that exists already in those centers? What are sort of good practices that you've
Mhm.
seen work well? And for centers that maybe are struggling to bridge that gap, what would you recommend to them?
Well, right now we are studying that in a research setting. So we have a grant program where we provide funding to the academic centers specifically for building community partnerships. So in some centers, that means hiring a nurse coordinator that goes to all the remote sites and getting them set up. Sometimes it's paying for some of the paperwork to get done that you need, writing protocols that actually take into account what can be done in the local office. And then the other piece is one of the best ways I've seen community sites sort of ease into the process is to do non-interventional trials first. To start with a trial where you are just taking an extra piece of tissue or an extra tube of blood or a patient-reported outcomes survey, something where you can get used to all of what you need to do to document things, to make sure you have all the pieces in place before you think about pharmacy and drugs on site and infusion and so forth of investigational agents. And I think that building those relationships, look, when you're the trusted community oncologist, yes, of course you don't get paid when you refer your patient out, but it's also a loss of that relationship and it's a problem for the patients and for the community oncologists. We need to build those bridges so that the academic docs are better about keeping their partners in the community informed and everyone being part of the patient's care, regardless of whether they happen to be at the academic center this week or at your office this week. And I think that that happens when people make the extra effort. And I think that that's the only way we're going to do better. So building those relationships and saying, I'm interested, but I need to, I want to share in the care. I don't want to just refer everyone to you.
And I think you highlighted a really important aspect that a lot of patients originate in community centers in the United States, and oftentimes those that eventually make it into those academic centers, whether it's due to referral or on their own, often have socioeconomic
Yeah.
resources, support, fewer comorbid conditions that make traveling challenging. And so I think as a service to our community, we could probably do a better job of getting better representation of sicker, frailer patients that are on the extremes of those um, aspects if we were able to get more trials open in community. And I know you highlighted some of the strategies there. What can we do to help facilitate getting patients potentially screened faster in those community
Mm.
sites, even if they don't treat them there, so that we can get those potentially sicker patients on those studies?
Well, I think that's where, and this is not meant to be a promo for Blood Cancer United, but that's where I think the nurse navigators can really make a difference. Because look, if you are in a general oncology practice and you see a patient with mantle cell lymphoma, the time it would take you or your nurse or your staff, even with AI, to find out what protocols are available and then talk to the patient and then figure out what the entry criteria are. And that it's just not feasible in a busy practice. But referring a patient to our nurses and getting a beautiful, list of all potential trials and what the entry criteria are, gosh, that can save an immense amount of time and energy. And I think for a busy practice, this makes an incredible amount of sense. And the nurses are very sensitive to asking very discreetly socioeconomic factors about travel, about, caregivers, about resources. And we can help with some of those resources as well. So we shouldn't give up on a patient just because we think it's going to be too hard for them. Oftentimes, they're interested if it's possible to do. And so let us help you because I think that is the way you have a better chance of the patient actually, getting into the center where you want them and continuing to keep you in the loop.
Well, I am so appreciative of your time and I'm so excited and encouraged by your enthusiasm because I think we have shared common goals. We want to get patients access to these novel therapies. And I really echo your comments about just introducing the idea of a clinical trial at any point in their journey by their trusted oncologist
Yes.
will only help by encouraging more trial participation so we can move the field forward. So, again, really appreciate you. And I'm so excited to see all the things you're offering to help us overcome some of these challenges.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. And please, all of our resources are free. They're there for you to use. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much.